We are currently in a golden age of bad games, not because good games aren't being made, but because they are buried beneath an endless flow of everything else on platforms like Steam, Game Pass, the Nintendo eShop, and the App Store. We haven't seen anything like this since the shovelware era of the 1990s, when, in the vacuum left by the 1983 crash, publishers began stuffing hundreds of low-effort games onto a single CD-ROM. But it has never been this crowded, and attention has never been more fragmented. Even massive AAA releases with huge marketing budgets are failing. Games that took years to make disappear, almost instantly, into the endless stream of clones which are now being produced faster and faster. One notable exception to this trend has been what we call indie games. As in music, indie no longer describes independence, it describes a style. In gaming, indie has come to mean emotionally rich games with heavily aesthetic emphasis, often lo-fi visuals, a focus on storytelling, characters, and meaning, rather than mechanics, systems, graphics, or sound. Both indie studios and AAA studios often end up releasing derivative games. Indie developers may have lofty ideas about art and storytelling, while AAA studios pursue mass production and popular entertainment. In the end, they are usually chasing the same goal, though, a massively successful game that makes a lot of money. Most of the games themselves are boring and indistinguishable from one another. What we are really interested in and arguing for is something else: DIY games. DIY games are the small games with big ideas. These tend to revolve around a single novel premise at their core: Balatro, Vampire Survivors, Slay the Spire. Something simple, something new, something exciting. We are already well into the era of short games with worse graphics, and the best games are the ones that understand this, lean into the aesthetic. Indie game studios should start thinking of themselves more like independent record labels. It doesn't really matter which labels you choose for inspiration. The best and most legendary independent labels all share one thing: a clear philosophy, a statement of intent. They establish an identity that is original, unique, and instantly recognizable. These independent labels aren't always confined to one genre. Sometimes they simply have a cohesive attitude that carries across different styles of music. But many labels do focus on a particular sound or scene, and several labels together can come to define an entire genre. Some releases become big statements that push everything forward. Others contribute more quietly to the movement. Not every release has to be dynamite. Together they create something larger than the sum of their parts. In fact, it's probably a good sign if a label drops a few clangers along the way. You want to be able to look back at some releases and wonder what you were thinking. That's experimentation. That's risk. And failure is part of the process. Another defining characteristic of a good indie label is this: they start with no money, no realistic expectation that this will change. Even when a label becomes successful, that success should come as a surprise. Nobody starts a punk label expecting to make money. Nobody starts a jungle label expecting to make money. That should simply be taken as a given. Wait, aren't dev teams more like bands? And each game like a new album? No. That way lies prog rock. Double albums, endless studio time, delays, re-recording solos, more overdubs. Everything has to be a magnum opus. Instead, think about singles. Tracks, tunes, 7 inches, white labels. You have a good idea for a song? A beat? A riff? A hook? You make a banging little tune around it, record it quickly, and get it out into the world. CDR, 7-inch, Bandcamp. And it's much easier to work this way if you imagine you're running a record label, rather than trying to be the band. So wait, does that mean I have to pretend to be a different band for each game? Well, not really. Maybe, if this helps you. But the idea is that you're both the label and the releases. Like a band starting a label to put out its own records, and eventually putting out records from other bands too. It's a loose analogy. Don't get too hung up on the details. Labels host club nights. They release compilations. They run radio sessions. They build a scene. They create an identity. They represent a movement. They do it all with a DIY ethos, a belief in what they are making. Future game developers sitting in their bedrooms with no coding skills and even less money should see themselves exactly in the same way.